Welcome back to Bible in Context,
where context is king and the original author's intent drives our interpretation.
And we are back from talking about Romans 9 at this point for a while, and the mixed multitude. Hope that was beneficial. Let us know if it was. Email us, tell us thoughts, questions, all those things, or reach out, leave a comment, whatever. I'd like to hear from you guys. So thanks for those that do reach out. We always like to hear your thoughts. So this time we are picking up. We just left off in chapter 38 last time that we talked about Genesis.
Maybe we do a real quick recap.
Yeah, you're right.
Just because it's been a few weeks.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about how Genesis 38, Judah is not characterized the best. He, just like he just got done leading an oppression on Joseph, he oppresses Tamar. Tamar is this figure that parallels Joseph as she is oppressed by Judah, and some other literary connections in there. We see Tamar oppressed in the same way as Joseph and vindicated in a way that Joseph will be vindicated later. So she parallels and creates expectations about Joseph's story. And Judah, he gets an opportunity to turn around, to repent of his oppression on Tamar. So maybe, just maybe, he will turn around and make amends with Joseph if he comes face to face with him again. And then one of Judah's children is given some literary markers to make us expect that one of his children will be the new elect one in the family of Israel. We don't know what to do with that yet because, so far Joseph is the elect one. So that's where we're at. We pick back up with Joseph's story again now that we've left this chapter it's again, very connected to the rest of the story, chapter 38. But now we're back to Joseph.
So Judah encourages his brothers to sell Joseph into slavery, and now he is going down to
right.
Egypt.
Yes. Last chapter, Judah went down from his brothers, and now Joseph is going down to Egypt, like we mentioned last time. And he ends up being sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, and becomes a slave there. So while he was there, we've seen throughout Genesis that the elect one and the elect family are continually prosperous to the point that the nations see that and want to create covenants with them, to have familial loyalty with them. That's not quite what we see here. We saw an inverted version of that with Jacob and Laban, but we do see here that the Lord blesses Joseph. He caused all that he did to succeed in his hands, so Joseph found favor in his master's sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. Okay, so the Lord is blessing him, making him fruitful. Mm-hmm. So we kind of see some actual blessing on him, and the word blessed actually is used to keep going down in verse 5. In chapter 39, it says the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for the sake of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, and again, that's because of Joseph.
Going back to the promise of Abraham, I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you.
Exactly.
And we're going to see later on, Joseph becomes a blessing to the rest of the nations.
Right. I wonder too, so I actually included this in the book. I think this is one that's kind of a maybe. So we've seen how Joseph is part of the two goats motif, where he's both goats. On the goat for Azazel's side, we see that goat is usually protected after they're sent out into exile in some way. You can go back to the episode on chapter 37, we talk more about that. And also the episode on chapter 4, we talk about that just for some more in-depth talk about the two goats motif. But yeah, like Cain, he was given a mark to go out to the wilderness so that he'd be protected. Lot, he was protected as he was given Exodus out of Sodom. So here we see Joseph in exile and slavery, which that should sound familiar when it's talking about the Exodus. And he is possibly, we're supposed to see this blessing and provision over all that he does as part of that protection that Joseph gets in exile, making things go well and giving him blessing. Just like the other non-chosen brothers happens to them, they were made fruitful out in the wilderness. He doesn't become his own family, but still, we kind of have a similar track here. So because of all this blessing that God has given to Joseph, he is, again, possibly protected and given favor in his master's sight, and he is made overseer over the house and all that he has. And so he has charge over everything. And then we're given this little note about he was pretty. It says in verse 6 that he was handsome in form and appearance. So Potiphar's wife takes notice of this, and it says that she cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." And so we see here, we don't have the full pattern of seeing and seeing as good and taking, but we still kind of have this idea of her casting her eyes on it and trying to take. And so she kind of becomes the Eve in this story, and Joseph is kind of portrayed as this forbidden fruit. But at the same time, Joseph is put in a test because of this. And this is actually going to link back to Adam and Eve a little bit as well, because we see this person who, Joseph, after even in his exile, he's been pretty elevated. He's now the overseer of everything in his master's house, and now he's being tempted. And he says in verse 8, "Behold, because of me my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in the house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" This same pattern of having charge of everything except for one thing is going to continue in the Joseph story, especially whenever Joseph is basically ruler of all of Egypt and has everything except for the throne. And that's going to be linked in quite a few ways back to Adam, who had charge of everything except for one thing. Don't touch this one tree. And so Joseph's answer is pretty good. He is put in a small way into Adam's test again, or in that case, Eve's test. That'll become more clear as we get into chapters 40 and 41, but it's just good to point out here that's what's going on. He's facing the test. Are you going to trust God or trust the serpent? And it's interesting here that he just says at the end of this, he doesn't just say, like, look, I'm maintaining loyalty to my master, but also to God. And so if only Adam and Eve had said, I have charge over everything except for this one thing, how can I do this? Then the story might have gone a lot different.
Well, and the testing doesn't happen just once. She's speaking to him day after day, trying to convince him to lie with her.
Right. And so we see, Joseph's persistence in his righteousness, as well as her persistence as well.
Yeah.
And so, she does this day after day. And then one day, he goes into the house, and nobody else is there except for her, and she comes out and catches him by his garment and says, lie with me. So, we see garments again. That's important. He left his garment in her hand and got out of the house.
So he's been derobed.
Once again.
Again.
He's been derobed. Tamar was derobed in her oppression, and so that's not good.
Right.
He's about to go further into exile. And that's a large part of this chapter, is him going further into exile. So
he passes the test, says, not my will, but your will be done.
Right.
And then he is derobed and oppressed further.
Yeah. There's some pastoral stuff there, too. It doesn't always mean that there's exaltation after you're saying, your will be done, not mine.
Right. Well, it mirrors Christ, of course, too.
Right. Although, he is exalted at the end of it.
At the end, well, as is Joseph.
As is Joseph, yeah.
Right.
Further into exile first.
Right.
Further in, if Egypt is death, as we've talked about, we mentioned that in the episode on chapter 37. Yeah. He goes further into death. And again, let me just mention here, we're talking about all these little links that we see between Jesus and Joseph, and there's something to that because of the typological expectations that Joseph is going to create by the end of the story. But what we can't do, and what we're not doing, is saying, oh, hey, this looks kind of like Jesus. This must be a prophecy. That is not how you interpret this. So just want to make that note, because that's done a lot. That's not right. We want to make sure that it is part of the literary structures. And we still got to talk about prophecy. We keep saying that every episode, but we got to talk about prophecy at some point too. Just how does it work? All right, so let's keep going. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. Okay, so she went and told this story to all the servants, and that she's the one. She cried out. She was the oppressed one, just like we've seen others cry out throughout the Genesis story. And so she's playing oppressed in this one. And she takes the garment, lays it up beside her until her master comes home. And then this garment becomes the means of deception towards the head of the house regarding Joseph. So this garment that was stripped off of Joseph is now once again the means of deceiving the head of the house about Joseph. Now we've also got her playing the role of the brothers as well.
Right.
And so, again, this is just furthering our expectation that Joseph is about to go further into exile, because the events of chapter 37 are on repeat. The events of chapter 38, the parallel there, is on repeat. And so, this is not good for Joseph. He's about to go further into exile. In verse 19, it says that when the master heard this, his anger was kindled, and the master took him and put him into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. And I do want to touch on this for just a second, because I think that, I've heard a lot of just comments on the fact that what typically happened here was essentially Potiphar would have put Joseph to death. That would have been the norm. And so, maybe he didn't quite believe his wife or something like that. That's not really the concern of this narrative. I think doing that, you're getting into a bit of refrigerator logic and trying to force the historical context over the literary strategy, which historical context is very, very important. But we also need to allow the author to flourish a little bit, where he uses literary strategy. Don't try to overwrite his intentions. One thing I think of is this is a good example, I guess. Whenever there's an explosion in a movie, somebody goes flying 30 feet in the air. That person is dead. But every time in a movie, if they're the hero, they get up and they keep going. Like, heroes in movies take unbelievable beatings, and no one questions it anymore because it's part of, just the flourish of the story. Same thing here. Literal context, the kind of beating that a normal, person took in a spy movie would have killed them. But it's a story, so let it be a story, and as far as that goes. So,
yeah, that's a good illustration.
Actually, speaking of historical context, should we talk about the Tale of Two Brothers?
Sure.
Have you read that?
No.
Okay, good story. This is one of several stories in the ancient Near East that parallel and precede the Joseph story. So in the Tale of Two Brothers, just to use this one as an example, there is also there's a book in the Old Testament library series called Israelite and Judean History. And in there's a chapter on ancient Near Eastern narrative parallels between Joseph and Moses and other ancient Near Eastern stories. And one of those is this motif of promiscuous women trying to get the hero to sleep with them, and they won't do it, and then they get mad and go do something about it to essentially lie to get revenge. And one of these is the Tale of Two Brothers. There's a Hittite version, and there's that kind of subverts the expectations of the reader, which is kind of cool. And then you also see this a little bit, they point out, in Gilgamesh, which isn't as strong of a connection, but it's there. Some of the connections that they put in that article I don't find all that convincing, but it's cool to see all the connections they draw between these ancient Near Eastern parallels. So, in the Tale of Two Brothers, this is an Egyptian story that's older than the Bible. And there's two brothers that are living together. One's older and has a wife, and there's a younger who is unmarried. And he is living there helping out with, keeping the household running and things like that. One day, he and his brother, they're out in the field planting some stuff, and the older brother tells the younger brother, hey, go back and get some seed. He goes back to get the seed while he's at the little homestead there. The wife of the older brother comes out and says, hey, sleep with me. He says no, and so she gets mad and lies to the older brother when he comes in and says that the younger brother has raped her. And so he gets mad and chases him down to try to kill him, and the god Re puts a big thing of water between the brothers so that they can't attack each other while the younger explains himself. The older believes the younger brother, and I think he kills his wife. I don't remember, but anyway, you can see that there's parallels. The younger brother actually, in trying to convince the older brother, cuts off a certain part of his body and throws it in the water. Oh, you're reading it right now, aren't you? Oh, you're okay.
Just read that part.
It's over here snickering, and so I knew he beat me to it.
Where the catfish eats them.
Yeah, a catfish or something eats it. And then later he finds a lady friend, and he laments his actions. Yeah, anyway. Then there's a big, long rest of the story where he's trying to get vindicated, and I think there's like some weird transformations and things. Like, I think he turns into a tree for a while. I forget. It's been a while, but
it makes the stories of the Bible look normal.
Yeah, that's true. It's a wild story. It's a fun read, though. But anyway, as far as the parallels to Joseph, that's the important bit, up to the point that Ra defends and allows the younger brother to vindicate himself, which, interestingly, Yahweh is the one that has a hand in vindicating Joseph. So,
well, and you see that emphasized here several times, where the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord made it succeed. So Yahweh is getting the credit for Joseph's plot armor.
Yeah, plot armor, yeah. And so, and usually the brother in the story survives in that trope. And so, that's another thing where it's like, let the story be a story and don't try to read back. Well, like, Potiphar was probably going to kill him. He just believed his wife, but had to do something that was, he had to make a political move to show his power. And so that's,
Yeah, we're reading way too much into the story, though.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah. And this also has something to say about just how the Bible was formed. We've talked about this plenty of times, but the author has very clearly stylized this. Did Joseph's history fit exactly in this mold, and then the author painted it so that it looked like these other tropes? Or did he fudge things a little bit to make this trope to give us a typological expectation in a prophetic narrative sort of way? I don't know. We won't know, but I think those are just the kind of questions we can wrestle with without being dogmatic one way or the other. So, all right, moving on. He was put in prison, so we're further into exile. Later in the story, in chapter 40, verse 15 and 41:14, this prison is called the Pit. Have we heard of the Pit anywhere?
He's already been in a pit before.
Yes. That pit was linked to Sheol, we talked about. And so, yeah, he's further into the pit, further into death, further into his exile in Egypt. And we've seen that already with so many markers paralleling the stories of his initial exile and this one. But, again, Joseph, he is put in charge of absolutely everything because the Lord has blessed him and caused everything that he does to prosper. You see this in verses 21 through 23. The Lord made everything he did succeed, and so he was put in charge once again. Exile, minor exaltation in Potiphar's house, more exile, minor exaltation in this pit, in the prison, and further in exile. And so we just see these little ups and downs in Joseph's story of exaltation, further exile, exaltation, further exile, exaltation, further exile. And then we'll see a big exaltation at the climax.
So the pattern continues.
Yep. We'll pick up with chapter 40 and talk about more dreams next time. And then, build our way towards Joseph's climax and then the testing of his brothers.
Sounds like a plan.